Hi, this is Gautam. For today's episode, we're going to look at this novel, The End of Men by Christina Sweeney Baird. Now, before we start with the review, I just like to point out one thing. The author writes a foreword, and in that she says she finished the first draft of the novel on June 2019. And when she was trying to go through the final review and the final copy, you know what happened. It was COVID 19. So, this book, which we are talking about, is very similar to the COVID 19 pandemic which we experienced. Since there is something which we experienced in reality, it is pretty difficult not to compare reality and fiction. But still, I tried my level best to give an unbiased review. The year is 2025, and we are in a futuristic Republic of Scotland. Dr. Amanda, in her emergency review, finds two male patients who used to be healthy and they die of sepsis. Now, even though the sample size is smaller, based on her experience, she comes to the understanding that this might be the start of a serious pandemic which could affect the entire globe. Now, in the initial phases, her reservations are not taken seriously by the medical department and it is completely ignored. Now, what happens then? Then picture a situation where you have COVID-19 pandemic spreading, but with two large differences. The first one being, instead of the lower fatality rate of COVID 19, visualize something around 95 to 97%. And the second difference being, this particular virus affects only men and not women, even though women can be carriers. Keep this in mind. The story doesn't delve into the scientific or technical aspects on the causative reasons for the spread of virus or the scientific aspects behind it, but it is more of a thought experiment. What would eventually happen if you create if there is a scenario where one gender, that is the male gender, pretty much get wipes out of the face of the earth. So the author tries to take this thought experiment, and I should say that she mostly succeeds in writing a page turner. Now there are two major themes in this particular text. So the first major theme is the question of management. Now, what would you eventually do if almost half of the human population is pretty much getting wiped out of the earth? Close to 90 percentage of the men die. So which means every system begins to crumble, your political, social, and economic system, because there are several professions in which men are vastly represented, disproportionately actually. For example, take professions like doctors, politicians, world leaders, firefighters, truck drivers, garbage men. So when your population begins to crumble, then naturally the entire system comes to a standstill. So every country in the world is trying to find solutions on how exactly they will be in a position to solve this problem. Women have to crash course and learn things in a very short span of time. And picture this: when most of the doctors die, statistics say that globally, like 80% of the medical professionals are men. Then there is a very big problem that even common ailments may not get treated because eventually the doctors are dying. So, if you take the issue of national security, for example, most of the armies or the air force or the navies in different parts of the world have a disproportionate representation of men, which means that national security is not an issue, not just an issue for a single country, but for several countries in the world. Well, there is a small, humorous quip that even though national security becomes an issue, there is one good thing about it. The thing is, the advantage is most of the terrorists are also men. As the struggle continues, systems begin to collapse in different parts of the world. There is a hypothesized civil war in China. We have government taking rigorous policies, for this, hypothetical situation. The country of New Zealand begins to, snatch babies from their mothers immediately after birth. We also have the situation where teenage boys in different parts of the world are isolated and sent away until a proper vaccine is found so that they can be inoculated. And we have these hard scenarios where nurses and medical professionals really struggle in the labor rooms, because when they receive the child, you can clearly see that there is a particular chapter on that. During the process of childbirth, when they begin to understand that the child is actually a male child, the child is going to die in a few hours, and we have events where that particular scenario is immediately captured. The second theme of the novel, that is dealing with loss and emotion, is properly tracked with the name of one more protagonist, Catherine. Catherine loses her husband and her very young child. So she is the one who kind of documents on what is going on in different parts of the world, and she properly wants to have the track record of how exactly this particular pandemic evolves over a span of 5 to 6 years. Right from the struggles to the discovery of the vaccine to return to normalcy and then finally repopulation. So, this question of emotional struggle is something which we find throughout the novel, that women are unable to cope, most of them are unable to cope with the loss of their husbands, their brothers, their fathers, their children, and eventually how they'll have to move on, because the struggle is so hard that if they don't step up and do their particular work, then eventually all the systems will collapse and it is not possible to holding any bureaucratic system or any economic system together. Coming to the misgivings of the novel, apart from major 3 to 4 protagonists, the author randomly introduces, single chapters which are about individuals, individual characters. So one advantage is that you get to discover, get to cover new themes. For example, there is a theme that we see a woman who's a victim of domestic abuse praying to God, as in so many men have died all across the globe, but my abusive husband is naturally immune to this problem. So please take his life away. So there you have the theme of domestic violence. So when you use single character chapters just for that particular 4 or 5 pages, you do have the advantage of making sure that you can address different themes. But the disadvantage is you don't get enough time to flesh out the characters in general. So at times it might seem as random references just written for the sake of writing rather than properly addressing the issue. Then the second theme, which I definitely felt was mostly missing, is that the struggle which men go through. Now, even though the author, dedicates a chapter for the speculative problem of the challenges associated with the LGBT community, of course, there are 1 or 2 chapters which are about the psychological aspects which men go through if eventually it happens. But technically, the larger perspective of how a man will feel if the entire male gender is collapsing. All of a sudden, there is a shift in population, a shift in demography, where the male gender becomes a minority. The loss of friends, the loss of his social circle, the loss of his pals. How exactly will he cope up with that? So those aspects were not really dealt with, as in the case, as much the author invested time on women and the challenges faced by them. This aspect, even though it was touched, I felt that it was not too detailed as she had done for the other one. In spite of its misgivings, one can definitely enjoy this particular pandemic, because luckily for the human race, this simply happens on paper. That's the end of the review. Bye for now.